Hello there, and welcome back to the Disc Connected. I am here with Celeste de la Cabra, who is one of my I don't even know how to say it anymore. Like close internet YouTube friends that I've really started to admire and fall for in the last couple months. They are doing all kinds of really great stuff for the physical media community, but also more so just for the film analysis community. There's not a lot of that out there, and I appreciate all of your hard work, but most of all, today, I appreciate you coming on here with me. So thank you for being here.
I appreciate you as well. I appreciate you reaching out. I appreciate you doing this with me again because my connection wasn't uh, up to snuff last time, and I appreciate your patience as I learn how to do all this stuff.
Of course, as Celeste just referred to, this is our take two of this. The first time I went to edit it, and the second half of the video is pretty bad. I stopped talking, and there's about 4 seconds of awkward silence, and then there's a response that starts to come in. But because there was awkward silence, I'm starting to talk again, and then we both say what, and then there's a lag, and yeah, it gets really bad for the last half hour. But I think we're gonna do really well with this one today, and this is a topic as we are in the middle of this series that I'm doing that I think deserves a lot of respect, and I think it deserves a full length, non juddering discussion. And with this, obviously, there's a lot of emotions involved, so I wanted to throw out there before we dive deep into this topic and even go over what it's going to be about. This is probably the time to say a slight little trigger warning. There's going to be some discussions on difficult topics that could go into things that have been traumatic for people. So if you are not in a space where you can deal with that today, either come back to it when you're in a better space or just skip it. It's not going to hurt my feelings, but I know that there are some people that will possibly glean something out of this conversation that maybe they've never considered. And also, for some of those people that have gone through something that you and I are going to discuss, this might be the time where they feel validated and seen. Because I know when I've had feelings like this, I've wondered if other people have gone through the same thing. And that brings me back to when we first talked about this. I was doing a discussion on KB Loves Movies channel, and after the discussion, Celeste reached out to me and said, "Hey, I really liked your topic about this, and I respect that you said that, and it was done in a thoughtful way." And I responded, "I mean, thank you for caring, but also maybe you and I could dive deep into that." So today we're going to dive deep into why some people might watch something related to their trauma and why that can be therapeutic or cathartic or a part of the healing process. But also, it just makes you not necessarily weird or abnormal. It could just be something that is a part of life. And with art, there's a lot of subjectivity, of course, and every single person's experience is going to be different. So we're going to share some of ours. So first off, why before we dive deep into like the deep emotional stuff, why don't you share what you try to do on your channel?
Sure. So my name is Celeste. I use they and she pronouns, and on my channel, I like to discuss physical media a lot, but I also really like to put a premium and an emphasis on the films that are on the discs. I
Yeah,
prefer to see the disc as like a vehicle or maybe an excuse to talk about the actual films that are on it.
right.
Um, I've also been very proud of the work that I've done in my film analyses and reviews. I'm trying to do more of that uh, and branch out a little bit, try different things. But on my channel, basically what we're all about is treating films as an art form and treating them with thoughtful consideration and respect and diving deep not just into elements of plot or performance or craft, but especially my favorite thing to look at are elements of theme, messaging, and politics that are within every single film that we watch. It's just a matter of how hard you want to work to find it. Um, so yeah, I hope to encourage others to think more deeply about films as more than just escapism or entertainment, and more so as like a work of literature or a piece of art, which is what I believe they are. So yeah, I think we do our best over here, and I really want to I say this at the end of every video, but I do my best to pride myself in fostering an inclusive and kind community. So, um, really, everybody except bigots are more than welcome to come hang out, and we'd love to have you. So,
In other words, Celeste has a lot of the same values as myself because I tried to do the exact same thing. And just to highlight something that I did the first time we recorded this, it was timely because it had just come out when we recorded it the first time. But I really want to call attention to your analysis of Barbarian because, again, I think in a year that a lot of people have jumped to this is one of the greatest years of horror history, which to me is a little odd, which it might ruffle some feathers. To a lot of people have been saying it. We're recording this the week of Christmas, 2022. This
mhm.
will be coming out in January, but a lot of people are revisiting some of these films and talking about the themes and really hitting hard. Like 2022 is one of the golden years for horror, and there were some good films, but it really takes a lot to get into be one of the greatest years. But Barbarian, you really nailed a lot of the things that you could list as theming for that film and what some of those things signify and mean, and the way that the film really goes into this odd, frenetic climax. I think is a nice place to really take the analysis like you did, and it's really important that we discuss those aspects because inherently most art has some other deeper meaning behind it. It's you could potentially say all art, but at least with Barbarian, it's not just a kooky kind of spooky film that people
Mhm.
were just kind of nonchalantly saying about it. There's a lot more to it, so it's nice to see somebody else that can feel a lot of the inherent deeper aspects of it.
Well, thank you so much for still highlighting that. I know that video is like a little bit old at this point, especially since this is our second try. But yeah, I was really proud of it, and I think that that film has a lot of interesting things to say about patriarchy and violence against women. And well, you can watch my review. There's there's a lot that goes into it, and I thought it was just a really special film. And yeah, I am of the opinion that all art is political, and all art has like messaging and themes that can be gleaned if you work hard enough. Like, yeah, I don't know. I typically challenge myself after every film to ask the question, like, what was the meaning behind that? How can I interpret this? Even if it's something
Right.
really, really silly or like trashy or campy or something. I really do believe there's something in there, even if it wasn't intentional. You know.
Yeah, and that's the with the subjectivity of it all that everybody can get a completely different message, whether it just
Hmm.
be a very surface level type of film or something that was everybody else saw as super trashy. It could be the most important thing you've ever seen in your life. Who knows?
Mm. Yeah.
So, speaking of most important, one of the things that is important to a lot of people is healing and recovering from different aspects of trauma because trauma affects everybody differently. There are different sorts of film that might help certain people. And one of the things that we wanted to highlight is why somebody might watch a film that depicts something similar to trauma that they've been through. Because for a lot of people, that can be immensely triggering and they don't even want to think about it. But for others,
Hmm.
it might be the exact thing that they need. And so we're going to be
Yeah.
talking about some things like rape revenge films, a lot of these like isolation horror films. A lot, basically, a lot of the elements of horror is one of the ways that people really escape for some of this catharsis. But even a lot of dramas and a lot of those films that have those deeper meanings can be something that people just need to see in that moment in their life. So we're going to be talking about those, talking about why we watch them, and also maybe talking about some personal traumas. So,
Hmm.
first off, why don't you share what led to this discussion for you, and maybe start us off with a film and perhaps some trauma you want to talk about?
Sure. Like you said, it was your conversation with KB. I believe you were discussing The Strangers, which I
Yeah.
actually have since rewatched. I'm proud to say, and
Nice.
you were really talking that film up and really discussing how personal it was to you and how like it spoke to your own personal traumas and your own personal fears and things like that, and how it can is an example for you of how art can be used as a medium for healing. And I found that to be a really interesting um, angle to look at a film like that, or just films in general, because that's something that I've personally experienced and I like to talk about as well. And so, I reached out to you and I was like, hey, that was really good. Okay. Oh, I did want to say real quick, like I do totally understand that way of being where the object of trauma is something that is really hurtful to re-experience or to see or experience again in a way that is unprompted, or even if you're prepared, it could be really difficult. There are certain traumas that I had and there are certain images that are still really difficult for me to see. And for a while, I just couldn't, like at all. Like it was something that I actually had to expend a lot of mental energy to avoid. And
Right.
that fucking sucks. Like I know that sucks. Um, but on the other hand, I also, and I think more so lately, relate to the aspect of this where I think often when we go through something like that, or when we're in a lot of pain, it really feels as though like we are alone in that, or that there aren't other people out there who can
Right.
understand or can help. Um, and so I think art is a really effective way to cut to the heart of that without just like, I don't know, listening to a lecture or reading something like nonfiction, which of course is super valuable, and I definitely recommend that as well. But there's something about the power and the subjectivity and the emotion that comes with a really great piece of art that can really expedite that catharsis and can help you see it in a new light, or empathize with other people, or even show you like a way out of that, you know. So yeah, I guess I wanted to start off by saying I really do understand both sides of it, and everybody's healing process is different, and you shouldn't feel bad about that. Um, but yeah, let's talk about Robert Eggers' The Witch. Um, that's a film that's really special to me that I've seen 3 or 4 times now. So I think the biggest personal trauma that I've experienced would be my pretty fundamentalist Catholic upbringing. Um, so, being the person that I am, clearly that was not an environment that was conducive to my true self, and it
Right.
was something that faced. I mean, I could call it resistance, but it was more like just straight up stifling and like denial, and all sorts of things that uh, I look back and wonder why I have so many problems with my self esteem, and I'm like, oh,
Right.
that might have something to do with it, you know. Um, so there is something to be said about how Robert Eggers in that film uses religious fundamentalism as the source of horror in and of itself. Like, there's obviously, oh, I guess this is a good time to tell people that when we mention the film we're about to discuss, we're probably going to spoil it. So you might want to skip
Absolutely.
ahead if that's a big deal for you. And yeah, I'm going to spoil this one. So, at the beginning, we see that this child has been taken by. I mean, it's assumed to be a witch. That's what they assume it to be, and that, of course, is scary. But like, it's not as effective as the elements of the family themselves. Like, they've chosen to put themselves in this isolation
Right.
due to an ideology that is so strict and unmoving that they can't even relate to other people anymore. Like, they have to. Uh, I mean, it's just 90 minutes of like self-flagellation and blame and all these things that I've experienced in my whole life. And
Right.
just the first time I saw it, like maybe fear isn't the right word for it, but I was just like I couldn't look away, and it was just horrifying to me, like to see it. It's definitely a more extreme version than anything I experienced, but
Of
also
course.
we're talking about like the 1600s versus now, you know. There's a lot of parallels between what those children went through and what I did. You know, and what I really love about what Eggers does with the film is he's very honest about how horrifying that is, even without the supernatural stuff, you know. And by the end of it, the source of horror that you're supposed to be scared of, that would be witchcraft and Satanism and all this other stuff, it becomes subverted and becomes this point of liberation and freedom for Anya Taylor-Joy's character, she like makes a pact with the devil and sheds her clothes and joins a community of free, like-minded people, and is finally freed from the shackles that religious fundamentalism and her family unit had imposed on her. And that to me is just such a powerful and cathartic ending. Um, it's also really bold, I think, too. Like I know that, like, I don't know, so depending on the crowd you talk to, people will be like, "Oh, Satanism is just like edgy shit," like, you know, like
Yeah.
nobody, you know what I mean? But for some people, me, that really is like a powerful thing. And you know, when you're raised so in a religious context or whatever, and you eventually grow to reject that, um, I don't know if it'll show up, but I have Gustave Doré's Lucifer Falling tattooed on my arm because it's just something I really identify with in its aesthetics and its messaging. And this is a film that I think really encapsulates that and does something really beautiful with it in like a 5-minute scene. And I think it's really special. And yeah, I think that that's like probably my favorite modern horror film, I think.
Wow.
Yeah.
The Witch is special, obviously. There's a lot of things that people have gotten out of that film. They've talked about it for like constantly since it came out. Eggers has this odd hold on whatever culture he's depicting and showing
Yeah.
all of it very, very accurately. And based on that, and even just the language that they use in this film and his other stuff, it really sets a tone for it being believable. And I think with this film especially, it really should highlight for a lot of people that maybe were not raised in a fundamental situation like yourself. And I don't this is where I guess I bring up mine for a second before I finish that sentence. I don't necessarily call my upbringing fundamental because my father, my stepmother that I was primarily raised by were not necessarily fundamental super Christian, but I attended a Baptist church for most of my life. There was a lot of things that were um, not seen as acceptable that are just flat out odd. Like any biblical hymns that mention the word dancing, they don't even allow you to sing because they don't agree with dancing.
That's a
Um,
new one for me.
yeah. So we talked when I first got married. We talked about getting married there, and they would not let us have a reception where there was dancing on their premises. So it was an
Mm,
interesting and odd choice, but because of that realization while watching this, that a lot of this is inherently traumatic. I mean, religion itself is built upon trauma. The
yeah.
way and again, not trying at all to ostracize or offend anybody that's watching that is religious, but especially like the supposed biblical teaching that a lot of people are following nowadays is built upon let's essentially scare somebody into choosing our choice, and
Yeah.
that for a lot of people is traumatic. So Celeste and I actually, through our messaging that we've had over Instagram previously, we found a shared bond over this religious trauma. There's a lot of stuff that we have both dealt with. There's a lot of stuff that a lot of people who haven't would really not understand that it gets that crazy in some of these organizations. And I also know that, as speaking from a point of privilege, I know a lot of people have had it a lot worse in religious upbringing. So much of my stuff will seem very superficial and petty compared to some of the very extreme cases. But even a film like The Witch, there's a lot to dive into that a huge number of people can relate to, and that's where I was trying to lead with. Is Eggers take something that is so off the wall, like 1600s Massachusetts, with accurate language and period accurate clothing and everything. And yet nowadays, somebody like you and I can look at it and go, damn, he understands this. How
Mm,
he gets exactly how I've been feeling. And this escapism that she feels at the end, I want that. And I
mm,
maybe by this point have started to achieve that or have fully achieved that. And seeing a film like this can really just you can learn a lot about yourself. There's so many things that you can discover through that ascension that she has because a lot of people in our shoes are trying to do that in different ways. And unfortunately, a lot of people view that as Satanism, and usually it's not as cut and dry as I worship Lucifer or something like that. genuinely, as I am finding myself doing the opposite of the church, and in the church's eyes, that is Satanism.
Yeah.
So that's where like the Church of Satan has embraced that, because they do
Hmm.
the opposite of the church that this country in the U.S. has been founded on. So yeah, absolutely, that film is cathartic and meaningful, and again, so relatable. I don't understand how the first time I watched that, I was like goosebumps watching this, going, how am I finding myself in a 1600s Massachusetts period drama going, wow, he sees me.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
love that movie.
Um, I have two thoughts to close out this session as you were talking. The first is that uh, I do want to go ahead and say that just like I don't know that it is a productive line of thinking to be like, oh, my trauma is kind of like nothing compared to other people. Like,
Right.
I'm sure we could have a competition about that, or people in the comments could be like, that's nothing. But
Right.
like, especially when you're young, your experiences are only relative to each other, and
Of course.
the effect that that has on your mind is unique to you. I only say that because I do the same thing. Anyone out there to know that that isn't a rational feeling, um, despite how powerful it is. The second thought I'm having is you really touched upon the specifics of the language and how that kind of helps one, like really date it and
Right.
put it in a specific time and place, but also like I'm thinking about it now, and a lot of the things that they say don't really make sense. Like they like the words don't mean the same thing as they do to us,
Right.
or they don't make sense because honestly their ideology doesn't make sense, you know. um, However, when you are kind of isolated in this particular brand of fundamentalism, it is really difficult to explain that to another person. Like my partner Avery was raised almost entirely secular, something that I envy her for quite a bit. But I will tell her things and it just doesn't make sense to her. And I'm like, I can't really explain it. Like you had to be there, I guess, or
Yep.
you had to live it. Like it doesn't make sense in retrospect, but within its own logic, like you understand why these people feel guilty or feel uh, as though they deserve to be punished for X, Y, or Z. Um, you know, even within my own family, like my parents were stricter than some of my friends who went to the same school as me and everything. And I would sometimes I would assume that we'd be on the same page, like, oh no, I can't do that, or oh no, that isn't okay, or you know, whatever. And they wouldn't get it. And I couldn't explain it. I just knew, you know,
Yep.
because it was so instilled. And that's kind of what he does there. Even though the language is different, the emotions are the same. And I don't know, if you know, you know, you know what I mean? Like that's kind of how it is. But uh yeah.
Watching that film and attending like a very, I don't know, a very formal religious procession, you get a lot of the same feelings, because
Hmm.
maybe 10% of the words you're gonna go, hold on, there's something a little off there, or am I stupid because I don't actually understand that? But I'm gonna look at the
Hmm.
context of it, and I'm gonna kind of fill in the blanks. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, the way that religion has done that for a lot of people has led to a lot of assumptions being put in place, and has led to a lot of different interpretations. And nowadays, that is rearing its ugly head every single which way, because there are arguments over which translation they're following. There are people that don't understand that a lot of these translations that they're following have only been in place for like 80 years. And this is supposedly something that you are building your entire life on, that was from 2100 years ago or whatever. I mean, that's just not real life. Like a lot of the words that they think that they're holding dear and using to criticize the actions of others, they were never in their form of the text before like 1948. So
Yeah.
maybe we should rethink some of what we are relying on before we build entire political ideologies out of it.
Yeah, as a person who was raised, you know, in a very specific interpretation of a very specific type of Christianity, like we're talking about subgenres of subgenres
Right.
in one religion at this point, you know, um, and now having been, I guess, what I like to call a devout atheist for like over 10 years, listening to people debate the minutia of certain Bible verses or certain theological. I mean, it really sounds to me like arguing about Pokemon cards or arguing about like a D&D campaign or something, except like in 3/4 of the Pokemon cards, I don't get rights and the people with them in their hands have political power. It's really a bizarre feeling, you know, like.
Oh, what a perfect way to cap that off. Yeah, that's great. And then, of course, to explain the nonsense, you'll always just hear at the end, well, you're just taking that out of context. Uh,
Sure. It's funny how
anyways,
everyone else is always taking it out of context. Anyway, we
except
don't
for
need to
you.
get into that.
We will step away from religion because obviously there's a lot that we could dive into there. And if you are interested, I would wholly recommend. Funny use of the word holy, even though I'm adding the W in there. Wholly recommend diving into something that might open that up for you. Like there's tons of nunsploitation films. There is a
Yeah,
lot
those
of
are fun.
spiritual warfare films that are interesting and really well made and actually can shed a light on a lot of the odd beliefs of different cultures. But that cultural aspect that I just alluded to is maybe the most important part of diving into this specific side of trauma because like for me, I've really attached myself to folk horror over the last few years. And when you think about it,
Me too.
a lot of these religious like even old Christian movies, they're just folk horror films. And
Hmm.
people that are of a different religion are going to look at it the exact same way that you do of something like The Wicker Man or
Hmm.
Midsummer or some of the old Italian folk horror films that go really wild into these crazy beliefs. It's the same thing. A lot of these religious films have crazy beliefs. And if you are finding yourself that when you were being raised, you kind of identified with some of those, dive into some of these other cultures and learn that that classic. I don't love the guy, but Ricky Gervais had a very classic quote that there's 3001 gods, whatever, that everybody in the world believes in.
Yeah.
I just believe in one less than you. And
Yeah.
in all reality, if you start to discover some of those beliefs from around the world, you might allow yourself to grow from a place that is not necessarily narrow-minded, but definitely maybe sheltered. There's a lot of stuff out
Yeah.
there that just being educated can really increase your acceptance of a lot of things. And also, one of the things that we highlighted the first time we recorded this that maybe might give some more context that I learned that first time is you are a political science major, right?
Yeah. I was. Yeah.
That's incredibly impressive nowadays, I would say, because I don't see a lot of people being raised with a passion for politics unless it's done in a very extremist light.
Yeah.
And that's on either side of the spectrum. I'm not saying that that's a one side thing or anything. There are lots of people that, just like in religion, are indoctrinating their kids with certain political beliefs, and
Sure.
um, political science can really give an interesting angle to a lot of these films because it gives context and it gives a line of questioning that a lot of us don't lead with. And when you see a film from the 80s in Spain, that's not going to be the same lens that you look at a film from 2022 from
Exactly.
South Korea. So,
Hmm.
yeah, those other cultures, that is one of the things that you can do to really highlight the way that you're viewing this art. And I feel like I'm going
Hmm.
on a rant on it.
In an attempt to not just keep hammering on the religious angle, I guess let's talk about Eyes Without a Face, which is uh, it's kind of a French body horror film, but it's also just kind of a psychological drama thriller, I guess. There was a period of time of a few years where I would have said that this was my all-time favorite film, but I've rewatched that and a few others, and it's not quite there these days, but it would still, you know, make some kind of list. Um, I just connected with it in a way that I don't often see uh, written about or spoken about. There's clearly this element of identity, and specifically of female identity, and of like feminine beauty and beauty standards. Like all these things are happening at once. Um, Essentially, it's about uh, a young girl whose face has been mutilated in some way, and her father is a scientist, and he has taken it upon himself to fix it and to graft a new face onto her own so that she could, become beautiful again. And he does this by capturing women, and it's a whole thing. But um, you know, it's essentially about this sort of, again, this sort of imposition of identity and of beauty standards that she hasn't chosen. Like, she's upset in various points through the film, but it's never clear that she's upset because, it's actually affecting her. It's affecting the way that others perceive her. And there's something about that is extremely relatable. That idea that um, you have to constantly be thinking about how others perceive you when you are thinking about your own identity and your own presentation. Um, you know, as a non-binary person, a trans feminine person who has had to come to terms with that relatively recently and who does not have the biggest amount of familial support in regards to that. It's something that I've had to think about constantly, and it's not something that I can kind of freely explore on my own. It's something that always has a big asterisk and a big caveat to it, And um, I don't know, this kind of like literal deconstruction of like beauty standards and identity. Um, I don't know how much of that was intentional in Eyes Without a Face, but like as soon as I saw it, I knew on some level, like to me, this is a trans film. Like this idea of I don't know, especially a parental figure or just people who were there before you were born, like saying, well, this is how you're supposed to look. And like, I'm not even going to ask you if that's what you wanted. Like, we're just going to, go to the ends of the earth, do all these horrible things, all in the name of preserving this kind of uh, gender binary and this kind of platonic ideal, I guess, of what femininity is supposed to be. And
So I'm going to go to my first one that I talked about last time that you alluded to, and that is The Strangers. Now, the reason this is such a very nostalgic, trying film for me is because I came from a background where I wasn't necessarily close with my family in any semblance of the word. I also lived in a very small town in the desert in California. And when I was very young, as an adult, I moved away from home and lived in an apartment for a little while. But eventually, I found myself living in a house out basically in the middle of the desert, where it's a little whiles to see your neighbors and stuff like that. So any film where there was isolation, it was uh, especially personal for me. So something like The Strangers, you have two people stuck in a house where they are feuding already. The entire film, we see them going back and forth, really, really tense already, which highlighted a lot of my close bonds. People around me, I was already at odds with for most of my life at that point. And moving into the later parts of the film, on top of being against the people that you're around, now you have this outside threat that is coming in, and being gosh, I don't remember what year this came out, probably 2006 or 7, somewhere around there.
yeah, I
um
think it's 2006 or maybe 2008. So it's around that. You're right.
so I was very young. I was like early 20s when this came out, and uh unfortunately I felt very alone. So being that young, one of the things that is an outside threat is just becoming who you are as a person, discovering what you like. Leaving religion around that time for myself, it was something that I had not fully come to terms with. So I still had a small-ish community that uh I mean, to be honest, they weren't really accepting of me, but I felt like I had a place to be, at least, because I still held on to some of those beliefs. Um, but through this film, there is so many different things that happen that made me just come to terms with the fact that a lot of people my age and a lot of people going through these difficult, lonely times had a lot of those same feelings. And one of the scenes that really gets me, and again, we're going to spoil a lot of these, is there's one scene in particular where I think it's Liv Tyler thinks she's protecting herself, is sat in place, hold up, ready to defend herself, and takes a shotgun. And somebody comes moving towards her in this room, which I feel like was a garage, maybe. And she pulls the
So
trigger. Go ahead.
I just watched it, so I can
Yeah,
correct you if you want.
hit me.
It's the guy in the situation, and his best friend comes up early because he's been asked to take him home
Right.
because they just had a bad fight or whatever. But he thinks that it's the strangers or whatever. And so he's holding the gun in the closet, waiting for the guy,
Right.
who is played by one Glenn Howardson, which is fun as a Sunny fan.
Hilarious
But
nowadays.
anyway, yeah,
So he shoots Dennis from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, and
yeah.
he dies immediately. And one of the things that while watching this, the very first time, and I did see this in theaters, it really hurt at the moment because I had been, I don't remember what nowadays, but I'd been going through something with my family at that time, and realizing, even though these people may be absolute pieces of shit in my life, I lashed out quite a bit. So there's a couple times that I maybe could have been protected from a couple of the things that I faced, but because of my lashing out, I made the situation worse. And I do know that it was something that this absolutely helped me cope with, because no matter what the situation they were in, it was still shitty. It was something that they had to overcome. And it was like this very personal, metaphorical thing for me that I was not ready to face that night in the theater. And watching it since then, it's genuinely been cathartic. It hasn't necessarily been that continuing sense of validation, but more of like, man, no matter what, people have their own experiences and they're facing a lot of the same things, but you just got to kind of realize that life is going to happen. And this film, especially, the very cold ending of this, the fact that we see them say that this attack happened just because they were home, we don't have a lot of control of a lot of the things that happen in our lives. So watching a film like this is really easy to let go of that sense of hopelessness, because you just kind of have to give it up.
Yeah,
So now
that's
I'm
the
curious, what did you get out of it, out of recent watching?
so I briefly went over this the first time we talked, but it was the very, very first horror film I'd ever seen in my life. I was probably 13 or something. And it had been out, I don't know how long. But my cousin was like really into horror films, and he was like, you should really watch them. And for a while I wasn't allowed to watch them. My parents wouldn't let me. But at a certain point, they relaxed a few things, and like it was more so me being scared of it. So I was like, all right, let's do it. Just hit me with a recommendation or whatever. Just pick one. Let's do it. And he picked that one, and it didn't scare me even like a little bit. And so I was really disappointed, but also relieved. Like this kind of uh, unknown. I mean, I guess horror is the word for it. Was kind of conquered. Like, okay, I watched a real horror film, and I am
Right.
alive, and I'm okay. But I kind of took it out on the film. Like, you didn't scare me. You have failed at your job. This film sucks. That was like a long time ago, and I approach films very differently now. So I was excited to rewatch it, especially after hearing you talk about it. Um, and I gotta be honest, I still don't love it. It doesn't fully work for me, but I did like it this time, and I did find a lot of things in it to appreciate. Um, the interpretation that you have is really interesting to me because it's not one that I had really considered. Um, to me, the film is very political in how it kind of explores this idea. Like at the beginning, it kind of fudges some facts about like violent crime in America. I think there's definitely a way to read it where it's like conservative fear mongering about
Right.
violent crime, which of course is a dog whistle for a lot of things. Um, but there's also this element to it. Me and Avery watched it together, and I was talking to her about it. I was like, that film felt very reactionary and very conservative to me. But upon some reflection, like, okay, so in this sort of conservative fantasy that the film presents, where at any moment, like comically evil slasher characters could break into your home and murder your whole family,
For no
like the
reason.
thing you want is a gun, right?
Right.
Um, but in the film, the only time they successfully use the gun is to shoot somebody that they love, which,
Yep.
if you look into the statistics, is what happens a lot.
Most
So
of
I
the
was
time.
like, I mean, kind of exploring this idea and showing the cracks in it. So I don't know. I think there's a lot of interesting ideas in it. I do like the interpretation of like this kind of exploration of the lack of free will, or the kind of um, like we feel like we have complete control over our safety and our families, and that's just
Right.
not true. Like there's certain things that are out of our control, which is a scary thought, but in some ways it's a liberating thought as well. So yeah, I think there's certainly a lot of different things you could get out of it. And I think it's an interesting film for sure. And I really like the masks, so that helps.
The masks are really nice. I actually I don't think we talked about this. Did you ever see the sequel?
No, I didn't.
Honestly, you may actually like the sequel more. It
Hmm.
is not remotely even similar to this film.
Hmm.
There is one very well shot scene that is stupendous, that is done in a swimming pool. So when you watch it, you'll remember that's what I'm talking about. But flashbacks to like the neon era of the 80s in such a weird, like almost Jaws facing way. And the
Hmm.
second movie is insane. You can't go into it expecting anything remotely similar to The Strangers, other than hey, the masks are back. But it's fun. It's a good movie.
Cool. I'll have
Um,
to check that out. I always appreciate a sequel that tries something new. You know.
well, and now supposedly they're working on like another trilogy of films that are it's a reboot and not even related to the first films or something. I'm very curious to
Interesting.
see what comes of that.
Yeah.
The other thing, those were like the two big ones that we wanted to talk about. I really wanted to highlight something that I kind of touched on there for a minute for me, and that's with a lot of horror. I really attach to the idea of isolation. Um, Being the way that I was growing up, I isolated myself from a lot of people. I had an alcoholic father. I had a verbally abusive stepmother. I had people in my life that were really negative, and based on that I stayed in my room a lot. Classically, like a lot of people from around my generation, I chose to do a lot of hobbies so that I had to spend less time at home. I chose actively to find some sort of solace in things like reading, writing, going on long walks by myself. And a lot of these films, they really highlight that feeling of isolation in some great ways. There's some films that try to do it that aren't always successful, but those ones that really hit it home, being isolated when the only thing that can actually help you in that moment, it feels like it could be being surrounded by people that can protect you, is a genuine fear for a lot of people. And
Yeah.
one of the things that I have felt in a lot of these is this validating sense through my continued ability to be successful as an introvert, I guess might be the best way to say that. And a lot of people question that because I do things like the channel. I've got two young kids and we go do our outings, whatever, to make them have a nice, fruitful life. But in all reality, I am best served just time by myself. The ability for me to sit and like recharge through my
Yeah.
own ability to focus on myself is something that if it were taken from me would ruin a lot of my life and a lot of my feelings about myself. And
Hmm.
so in some of these films, that sense of somebody threatening that isolation where you're off by yourself in a very vulnerable state is
Hmm.
all too real, and something that has certainly affected me. And again, just like you said, a lot of these films don't necessarily scare me anymore, or maybe never truly did. But the
Hmm.
emotions that they can conjure while watching these are very important, and not just for the idea of fear, but for the idea of validation.
Hmm. Yeah. I think that in horror films in general, when you're talking, I mean, fear is typically the primary medium through which we get these emotions across, or the starting point.
Right.
But I feel as though it is a great place where extremity is sort of expected, if not, appreciated. Um,
Right.
Whereas in like a drama, if something really horrible was to happen, that's like a big deal, like it could blindside you, or it's not par for the course for the genre. But for, I don't know, there's something about horror films where this sort of emphasis on the most extreme forms of the human experience I find to be a really important exercise in empathy for other people. Um, I find that it is a safe place to explore these things that we all sort of feel and fear.
Right.
And especially for people with traumas, like it is a safe place to explore those experiences and to see other people emotionally react to them and get through them or not. But that's kind of how I feel all art is that it's a safe place to explore empathy and to um, work through emotions or experiences that we might not get a chance to in our everyday lives. Um, and I guess horror just kind of has aesthetics that work for me personally, but also it goes to places that are deeper and darker that other genres are often, ironically, kind of scared to explore. And um, I might be talking in circles a little bit at this point, but I do think that it is an important genre for empathy and for emotional growth.
That exercise of empathy is kind of the most important aspect of this, and something that I wanted to lead into next. I had
Mm-hmm.
mentioned rape revenge films at the beginning, and for this especially is something that I think people have shied away from for many years. Obviously, the classic films that really have this nasty reputation have affected people for decades. You know, like I Spit on Your Grave and Thriller that Vinegar Syndrome just recently put out. They have this reputation that kind of supersedes them in a way that people just say, "Oh, I'm never going to watch that." And the
Mm-hmm.
hard part nowadays is the same way that it is important for us to learn like the motivations behind some of the biggest conflicts in world history. Some of these films are important to see through that sort of lens, just in empathy, because just like we can in history, we don't want to repeat a lot of those mistakes from past years. And
Mm-hmm.
somehow we have an entire underbelly culture nowadays that are thriving on this idea of like men being owed sexual pleasure from women, and men that find it okay to send unsolicited pictures and a lot of those things. And the hard part
Mm-hmm.
is these rape revenge films. You may not physically be raping somebody through some of these actions. However, they're kind of comparable, and a lot of people are not understanding that. Like the idea of watching I Spit on Your Grave and just like laughing at the way the guys get tortured is the wrong way to look at it. This is an atrocious film that is here to explain to you how much this woman went through that is traumatic, and her response to that specific trauma. You should be responding in a way where you are empathizing with her and saying, fuck those guys. Like they messed up, and genuinely they deserve a lot of this. So
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people shy away from watching it, but it's important for other people to gain that aspect, because like me, I've never been sexually assaulted that I know of. I've never been in a situation where I felt like I was a victim. However, I know that my wife has. I know that most women in the world by
Yeah.
2022 have. And uh, because I can't identify with that personally, I should at least find it within myself to be able to empathize.
Yeah. Um, so I want to take a second to kind of defend the genre of rape revenge films, and also to say that a lot of the ideas I'm about to put forward, I have probably subconsciously stolen from other more intelligent writers on the subject. That, like the Faculty of Horror podcast, did an excellent episode on rape revenge films. Um, so I want to go ahead and shout those people out real quick because I might just be straight up ripping their shit right now. But I think that the rape revenge genre is certainly filled with exploitative male directors that sort of take this as an opportunity to show horrific things being done to women. I know that these people exist, and I know that these films exist. Um, but I do think that a lot of them, if not most of them, and let's take I Spit on Your Grave as the kind of quintessential example. I think a lot of these films only exist or only work if you are empathizing with the woman. Like that film isn't scary if you are empathizing with the men. I guess it is at the end, but I mean, that's clearly not where the narrative is being
Right.
framed, and that's clearly not where the camera's perspective is. Um, we are clearly following this woman's trials and tribulations and seeing her go on an arc of redemption and revenge. Like that only works if you place your empathy on the woman's experience.
Right.
Um, I think that it's a great film. Honestly, I do think that it's a really brave. Like her performance is extremely brave and really harrowing and just really impressive. I think it does a great job of making sure you stay with her pain as opposed to, I guess, empathizing with or with the male characters or being voyeuristic in their violence. And, I also think that the films only exist because they are kind of a fantasy of what society and, it's complicated, but let's say generally women want to see in society, right? Like the fantasy being of being able to kill your attacker only exists because that justice doesn't exist in real life. Is I guess what I'm trying to say. Like um, rape culture and patriarchy and misogyny are still so terribly embedded in every aspect of our society, even in more progressive or, you know, left leaning spaces
Absolutely.
or whatever. I see it all the time. It's and I've heard this from, the women in my life, from women online, and you know, as a person that is actively transitioning as a non-binary person, I kind of have to reckon with this personally
Right.
that in most situations when women are hurt by men and especially powerful men, there isn't consequences for it. In fact, you only open yourself up to more hurt
Right.
by speaking out about it or doing something about it. And in these films, that is kind of baked in as the assumption, which is why they have to just cut to the chase and take care of it themselves. You know, the films don't exist if we all watch that and are thinking, oh, well, clearly she can go to the police and tell them, and then they'll be in jail and it'll be fine. Like,
Right.
no, you're like, well, fuck that. That's not going to work. You got to take care of it. Um, and I do believe that, like, let's take this this trauma film that I watched recently. It's called Honor Killing. I'm not going to lie to you. It's one of the worst films I've ever seen, but I really admired what it tried to do. Like the director, she wanted to make like a rape revenge film that really, really hones in on the things that I'm talking about and just take that all the way. And, there's really no time spent with the men in the film or sympathy towards them at all. Um, I'd say it's worth checking out. I personally didn't like it at all, but I do really want to shout it out and I do respect it because I think it kind of goes to show you that more modern directors, more modern women directors, Revenge is a film that also kind of goes into what I'm talking
Love
about.
that movie.
It's really great, but like these newer female directors are seeing those older works and they're like, there's something here. Like you've
Right.
gotten most of the way, but let's kind of finish it. Let's kind of add our own voice to this. Um, yeah, I don't know. I guess what I'm trying to say is that if that wasn't there at all, I don't know that we'd be seeing so many women directors making these types of films in their own
Right.
way, as like expanding upon it, as opposed to just like, fuck that, that's all garbage. You know what I mean?
A lot of the stories that we all just you somehow ingest growing up that are classic to us, like the Disney adaptations and classic fairy tales and what have you, that we all just know inherently by being human, basically.
Yeah,
A lot of those, they only work because there's comeuppance for a villain. Otherwise, the story is a waste. And back then, that was seen as literally this common phrase, the moral of the story of why something doesn't happen. And unfortunately, nowadays, justice is not inherent in a lot of stories. And when I say stories, I'm not talking about art. I'm talking about the story of humans and the fact that it is something that we are still fighting for and clamoring to protest and to try to elevate just awareness is showing you enough that there is not this comeuppance. And because of that, these films should exist to show you the plight of some of these other people. And that's where again, that empathy is maybe the most important aspect of some of these films, because if you can't even place yourself in that moment and understand the vitriol that this person is feeling in response, and you're like, "Yeah, I mean, she dressed that way, she had it coming." Like, you are the piece of shit. You are the one that deserves that comeuppance. And again, if there are unsolicited messages sent to other people, if there is something that you reach out to somebody and they say they're not interested, and you call them names in response simply because they're not interested, you are that person. And
Yeah.
this, in a way, these films are depicting that, and you have to be
Hmm.
able to find that within yourself, or I'm gonna be honest, you're kind of broken. That's what these movies are.
Hmm. Yeah, there's a really great scene in I Spit in Your Grave specifically where that is kind of explored. I remember being kind of shocked by it. One of the men is essentially, I think he literally is saying like, "What? Come on, you obviously wanted this," or it's just like you're out, looking all sexy, and like, what am I
Right.
supposed to do? I was like, wow, this is we're still not past this, huh? you know, uh, so
It's true. It's like modern catcalling, basically, even though catcalling still exists, but it's crazy that it's something that we do still have to fight every day. But uh, also, that this whole idea of empathy, it's not just within rape revenge. There's so many other traumatic films out there and traumatic feelings that these emotions can be explored upon that you are not in and maybe have never felt. And that's where that education side really can shine a light within yourself for you, because like for me, I was raised sheltered. I was raised in a home where I did not get to take part in a lot of other cultures. I did not learn a lot about international film. I did not get to see the way most other families were raised, other than the random other sleepover, which was pretty much always other white families. Thanks, mom and dad. The way that they set everything up for me through my upbringing, coupled with religion, was meant to be this bubble that they probably justified to themselves that was for protecting me. But in all reality, that education can change somebody's life in a way that they open up to this view of actually caring for other people, which unfortunately a lot of people are missing nowadays. And that's where I would say explore some of this maybe more extreme cinema.
hmm.
In October on my channel, one of the things that I really dove into during the last episode of Reconnected was watching these extreme films because of this exploring side. And with films like Martyrs and Inside, and even a Serbian film that people will just never choose to watch because of the reputation, or because there's horrific pornography in a couple of them, or there's just extreme horror that they can't deal with. There's a lot of things that you're genuinely losing out on.
Hmm.
A Serbian film, for example, has come out of a place of pure protest, and it has artistic merit. And a lot of people, they just hear the name of the film and shy away because they in their mind they've already made up their own assumptions about it. So
Hmm.
I would highly suggest exploring to some of these areas, even if it maybe feels like a darker path that you can light on your own, to discovering something about yourself and about other people. And that's what makes us human.
Yeah, for sure.
I
Yeah.
last time we tried to record this, I did mention the idea of uh, really being a perfectionist, because I think you said that you've struggled with that previously, and I mentioned
Hmm.
how I've recorded some videos and hated them and recorded them 3 and 4 times, and then you said this idea must be terrible and scrap the idea. One of those is for this idea of like generational response to horror and how it's been shaped over the last, say, 50 years, probably starting around like Black Christmas and Halloween. And
Hmm.
it seems like the way that horror is, we'll say, successful, I guess, lately, is by targeting a lot of the fears at the time of, we'll say, the 15 to 25 year olds. And it's
Hmm.
always been interesting to me to see how the response in those common fears has evolved, and in response to that, the traumas that people have gone through have evolved as well. So in the beginning that I really started to think about this, you got your Black Christmas, your Halloween, your everybody's starting to talk about the idea of a boogeyman. Basically, is somebody who's out there, they could possibly get you, and then transitioning into some of the later, maybe if we look at that as like the baby boomer generation, moving into more of like a Generation X, we've got stuff like Candyman and stuff like Scream was probably close to the end of that feeling for me, is where it was very cultural, very personal, and it could come to a point where you can be attacked through everything that makes you who you are as a person. And then the early 2000s was an odd time, because then you got the millennials coming in around that time, and they were struggling to find an identity. The way that the internet came in and changed things for a lot of people. I think something like Jennifer's Body is maybe the perfect example for this, because it had a lot of questions in that movie. There's a lot of, who are you seeing these people as? Who are these people behind closed doors? Who do the adults see Jennifer as, and how is she going to actually find herself? And maybe near the end of that cycle is where we get to something like Cabin in the Woods, because a lot of millennial fears at that time is starting to understand is, no matter how hard I try, feels like there's somebody always behind the scenes controlling every aspect, and I don't get to choose a damn thing. And Cabin in the Woods really highlights that, because no matter what happened, the people that are at this cabin, they're screwed either way. And recently, which if we're looking at this whole Gen Z model, did you get to see Bodies, Bodies, Bodies this year?
No, not yet. Actually, my girlfriend bought me the Charlie XCX long sleeve T-shirt from it for Christmas. So I'm going to be making it a point to see that as soon as possible.
So you did not see Bodies, 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 and for a lot of people, I think that they saw this as a film that they were turned off by based on the trailers, and they just actively chose to not see it. And I will push back against that. I went and saw it in theaters, and it is maybe one of my favorite films of the year. And the reason being is it really highlighted the difference between millennial and Gen Z thinking on how they are viewing this whole like the internet side of things, because Gen Z has been raised on it. They've seen it from birth. So millennials, thinking back to like the early 2000s, the Jackass era, the whole leading to like the Cabin in the Woods time, like around 2012, a lot of people focused on not having a reaction to things. It was this attempted like public apathy, which I still don't understand. Like just saying, nah, bro, I don't care. I don't get that, how that was cool for a while.
I entirely blame South Park for that.
Yeah.
I think South Park ruined like a generation of empathetic thinkers with their brand of humor and their like, they say they make fun of everybody, but I think the through line of every single one of their targets is, oh, you had the audacity to care about something, and I'm going to make fun of you for it.
I can see that. Yeah.
I will say it's still funny, but I blame it entirely.
That makes sense, and that's how art can be subjective in multiple ways. Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. It really shows the difference nowadays, because it highlights this exercise of public empathy and how people are doing their best to seem better than other people based on how they care or show that they care about something. Because maybe a lot of people, behind the scenes, they don't actually give two shits about what they're talking about. So Bodies, 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 I think is a nearly perfect horror film for those that are, say, 15 to 21 right now. But they're probably going to respect it less than maybe somebody that's 25 to 30 who's seen the ebb and flow of the early 2000s leading into now. And that's why, identifying with these certain generational gaps and finding that catharsis in, I may have felt like an idiot for things that I did in the early 2000s, but I guarantee they're going to feel like an idiot for this as well. And what we can choose to put our actual emotional stakes behind, it matters to a lot of people. And it's the important thing is it's got to be genuine. And unfortunately, through stuff like Bodies, 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 they show the truth of a lot of like social media and these public outcry platforms, that a lot of it is not genuine. It's just a matter of trying to gain clout, perhaps.
Yeah. That's a subject that is always really thorny, because there's a lot of people that want to take advantage of the very real thing that you're describing and paint the broad brush and uh, kind of use it as a escape from any and all consequence or criticism. From what I've heard about the film, it is discussing these things, but from a kind of in-group perspective, as opposed to like a reactionary
Right.
sort of right-wing perspective. That's a really tough thing to pull off, and so I'm definitely excited to check it out and see what sort of things it has to say about this kind of current moment of online politics and discourse. Um, I mean, it's certainly something that really affects a lot of people, and that I'm 25, so I kind of always felt somewhere in between these two
Right.
generations. People have told me different things at different points in my life, but I definitely feel as though I was online for most of my life, so I kind
Yeah.
of relate to this sort of thing. Did you see We're All Going to the World's Fair?
I've seen. Yes, I've seen it.
It's so good. Um,
It's so slow that so many people are falling away from it, but I think it's one of those things that you really just have to be invested in it.
I think it is a film made for people that grew up on the internet all the
Yeah.
time. You know,
Yep.
it is like the terminally online horror film, and that's sort of where my mind was going when you were discussing the differences in how different generations are approaching
Yep.
horror films. That's directed by a very young non-binary person, and
Yep.
I just think it is really special and really cool to see all these with the internet and with the technology to make a film becoming so much more accessible and so much
Right.
cheaper. All these people that were previously kind of boxed out of, establishment filmmaking or Hollywood or the studio system or what have you, have had more opportunities to make films that look good on a lower
Right.
budget that can explore these more specific themes to specific groups. And that's a really great example of one, I think, because that kind of really explores the horrors that lie online.
Right.
Um, it really connected with me, and I want to highly recommend it. Uh, and it has that cool glow in the dark slipcover if you get it off of Vinegar Syndrome's site,
This is
which
true.
is sick as fuck.
Yeah, that film is a great example, and one just to kind of close this down to show the exercise and empathy. I want to mention um, just the idea of privilege overall as a whole, because that
Hmm.
is uh, a terror for a lot of people. I mean, whether it
Yeah, for
be
sure.
poverty, whether it be classism, whether it be ethnicity related, whether it be literally what country in the world you are born in, there is
Hmm.
all kinds of privilege that people are facing that can completely and will completely change the outlook of somebody's life. And to tie it all back into what we originally talked about, that is like the base of religion. Depending on where you're born, is going to dictate what you believe in. Is what most studies have shown. So,
Hmm.
looking at those aspects and learning about those other cultures is truly the only way that you can experience it sometimes, because it might not be accessible to me to fly to Rio de Janeiro and learn everything about the local culture, but I can
Yeah,
watch a film that embraces it and can be either fully accurate or exaggerated, and look at that and change my perspective just to think I'm not the only person in the world, and my experience is not what is shared
yeah.
by everybody else, because we are all very, very different.
Hmm. Yeah, that reminds me of a thought I had earlier in our conversation about uh, really taking the time and the care to explore films made by people different than you and from
Yes.
different parts of the world that you might have never even heard of. Like, I mean, imagine just how ignorant a lot of like everybody is of certain subjects, certain people, certain cultures.
Right.
And a film is just such an easily accessible and digestible way to just get one slice of that world. Um, like I remember on the Criterion Channel recently, there was a bundle of films from a Romanian filmmaker. I'm sorry. And I was watching these, and I realized I don't know a single thing about Romania. I really don't. And now I feel like I know something. Like I
Right.
know some aspect of this. And the unfortunate thing is that these aren't the types of films that are being pushed by algorithms and things like that. These are the kind of things you have to one, recognize that you're missing, two, have a desire to fill in those gaps, and three, put in the work to fill them in, you know? And it's easier said than done, you know? Like, I know on my Letterboxd stats, it has the world map of films that you've seen from, and there's just some really glaring omissions in parts that you would expect, you know?
Right.
Like there's 1,010, you know, there's like fucking 1,500 films or whatever from the United States, and then like 10 for all of Africa. Like that is, when I see that, I feel personally embarrassed. I'm like, that
Right.
is a failing on my part, but it is also just a failing on the film industry as a whole. That if you, I mean, I think that's pretty good for most people that
Yep.
have seen any, let alone in the double digits, you know, like most people, I think, couldn't name you a film from Africa, let
True.
alone have seen one. And that is a really glaring failure. And I mean, books have been around for this sort of thing forever, but I mean, I don't have to tell you that like that films are a very specific form of a very powerful, or very specifically powerful is the word I'm trying to say.
Right.
Like you can't substitute the image. And also, I mean, we're talking about generally a 90-minute runtime versus a month reading a book. You know what I mean? I was going somewhere with this, I'm sure.
Well, one thing I'll throw in is that's why I give so much power to a lot of this physical media. And so just to kind of
Yeah,
bring it back for this channel, that's one of the main reasons why this is basically my biggest passion. Because
yeah,
something earlier on my channel, I did a review of the film Detention that was put out by Decanalog, one of the Vinegar Syndrome partner labels. And
the catalog rules.
they are amazing, incredible. But I watched the film and I liked it. It was well made. It was entertaining. It was good. But then I did what I try to do with most of these releases, as my wife slept on the couch next to me. I went through all of the special features and immediately read through the booklet. And going through the
Yeah.
special features highlighted a lot of the history of why it was made, because it's a video game adaptation into a film. But then the
Hmm.
booklet shared a lot of the historical context of the actual plight of what was going on behind the
Exactly.
film.
Hmm.
And because of the ignorance of American education, only really focusing on American history for the most part, even when they're talking about world history, it's in our context. I had no clue about anything that this was talking about. So I took my experience with Detention, I took my experience with the booklet, and I spent probably a combined like 12 or 14 hours or so just researching the hell out of the history of this and going,
Hmm.
oh, this is like fucking genocide. How do I not know anything about this event in history? It's affected so many people, and just trying to like drink it all in. And the truth is, we can do that for almost all these films. There's a
Yeah.
lot that can be gleaned in different manners. So it's not all it doesn't all necessarily have to be international focus. It can be something internal that you're focusing on somebody else's plight. It can be
Yeah.
something where you are focusing on a different gender. It can be something that the idea of classism or protest cinema can be enough to make you realize I am not everyone else. But
Exactly.
then,
Yeah.
if you want to take it a step further, something like Scorsese's Criterion World Cinema Project, really diving into those films and
Hmm.
discovering cultures that you literally can't name a single thing about. It is a magical journey that it it is expensive for a lot of people. I'm not going to take that away. Like a
Hmm.
$70 or whatever on sale Criterion box set is a lot to invest, but the experience that you can gain out of that is worth so much more than that. And not to mention a hell of a lot cheaper than like 5 round trip tickets to different places in the world.
Yeah. Uh, I have a couple more thoughts from that. I don't know
Shoot it
how
out.
long I don't know
No,
how
I
long
can
you
go as
want to
long as
run,
you
but
want.
all right. I remember the original thing I was trying to get to. What real quick though? What was that film you were discussing?
Uh, Detention.
Detention. I'm gonna have to check that out. But I think that yeah, what you were talking about with the special features and the booklets or anything, that shit is just so underrated. Like they put so much care and thought into it, and you can learn so much from it if you just take the time. And I know that I'm as guilty as anyone. Like there, what I do is when I'm done with the disc, if I don't do it immediately, I'll put it in a little pile under my TV for like this is the stuff that I need to go through the supplements that I
Right.
just watched, and it continues to grow and it can get intimidating. But and I understand time is precious and it's hard to go through all that stuff.
Right.
But I mean, even if you just watch one or something, you really can get a lot out of it. And you know, I would say that is the vast majority of how I have learned about films is just watching them and then reading about them and like watching the stuff that is literally already on the disc that I just bought. You know, I'm not going to name any names. I don't do that. But I was watching a conversation with some people and they were talking about booklets for boutique Blu-rays or limited editions or whatever. And they were like, I mean, does anybody actually read those? Like, it's nice to have them. Like, I want it because it comes with it, but like, I've never read one and I'm probably not going to. You know, person was like, yeah, I've never read a booklet. I was just like, then why did you buy it? And then
Right.
like somebody took the time to write that. Like, there's a lot of thoughtful analysis and context in those booklets. And, you know, that's where I really feel like I fail is that because I've been struggling with reading in general, you know? And it's something that always takes the back burner, but I always feel very rewarded when I take the time to do it. Like there's never nonsense in there, you know? Um, and so, yeah, the main thing that I was trying to get to earlier is that what I recommend for really any film, but especially for a film that is completely outside your wheelhouse, like from a country you've never heard of, or from a director you never heard of, or what have you, what I make a habit of doing is I always look up the film that I've watched and read the whole Wikipedia article on it because you get so much context for why this film was made. Like we are so used to one perspective, especially if you're an American or if you're in any number of privileged groups. Like you have been fed one specific perspective, and you that comes with a lot of baked-in assumptions that aren't going to translate to different cultures. And if you aren't starting from the same page, you're not going to appreciate it in the same way. So I think some reading beforehand and then more reading afterwards is really worth it in terms of enriching your experience. And then the last thought I wanted to throw out there is like, yeah, Criterion box sets and shit like that can get really expensive, but I really just want to say that the Criterion channel is so good. And for like $10 a month, I mean, the amount of world cinema, the amount of underseen cinema, queer cinema, female directors that they really put in the work to highlight is just like, I don't see that anywhere else. And all those world cinema box sets are on there always. So, I mean, they put at least one new female directed film on their service every single week. Like they have made that a policy. Um, and I mean, I think every single film from Africa that I've seen was on the Criterion channel. Like they really do a great job. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend like physical media is super affordable or, you know, accessible to everybody. Like I would say if you could only do one thing, Criterion channel subscription will, I mean, it changed my life. And I think, you know, it's worth the investment. But on this channel, I'm sure we got a lot of people that buy a lot of discs. So for sure.
Well, I also
Those
don't want
box
to
sets
approach
are
that
good.
from that space of privilege either. And the other thing I'll throw out is if you, you know, first off, if you're worried about investing in the actual purchase of the disc, most of these discs people don't realize are available through your public library, and
Hmm.
you can go rent them literally for free in most towns across the country. And if they don't have one, they're probably a part of a network where they can get one for you. So don't be ashamed to seek that out, because I understand a $70 box set is a big deal and it's taking up space on your shelf. But if you just want to try it out, see if it's something that you're into, and maybe a streaming subscription isn't worth it for you, go to the library, get something for free, and pick up a book while you're there's no reason not to highlight libraries. It is an underutilized and undercared for resource in 2022, which I understand we have the internet, but
Hmm.
a lot of that is being formed behind the scenes to cater to your specific views. And
Yeah.
you don't want to be stuck into that bubble where you are viewing your opinions as facts.
Yeah. Also, I mean, libraries get their funding based on how much they're used. Like,
Right.
it's not just like you're mooching or something, like you're supporting your library by using it. Have you heard of 3D Blu-ray Rental.com?
I believe only from you.
Oh, really? Okay. I've been trying so hard to get more people into this because it's like the coolest service where like I mean they tell you what studio and label puts out the Blu-rays that are on their site.
Nice.
And depending on the plan you get, I do 8 discs a month. it is like $3.50 a disc to rent it. I mean, that's less than an Amazon digital rental. I don't quite understand how they do it, but it is incredible. And I'm not sure if it has saved me money or cost me more money because, I'll get the disc and I'll watch it. And then in one instance, I'll be like, I'm glad I rented that. That wasn't for
Right.
me. And I got to experience the restoration, the special features, etc. And then in other instances, what I'll do often is I'll rent one disc from a box set and I'll check it out. And I'm like, yeah, that was tight. I want the whole set now. But the coolest thing about them is I email them all the time with a list of like Vinegar Syndrome partnered labels, Arrow box sets, you name it. And they're like, cool, we'll have these up tomorrow. And then I can rent them.
Wow.
It is amazing. So that's another point for accessibility. If you can afford $28 a month is what I pay for it, I think. Yeah, 8 boutique discs of your choice that you can rent as long as you want. And it's amazing.
Interesting. Just for everybody aware, all of the links to everything that we've talked about today, I will be doing my best to put in the description. Obviously, Celeste channel will be on there highlighted because you should be spending more time with them. Celeste, you are a gem, and a lot of people. What is the most respectful way to say this? A lot of people would not be open to having a conversation like this. And speaking as just got to classically pointed out, a cis het white man that is overweight in Missouri and the epitome of all stereotypes of Americans. Other than that, I thank you for being open to coming on for a discussion like this and understanding that there are people that are trying to do better for history. There are people that are trying to spread the right information. There are people that want the best experience for all of us involved, and the best thing we can do is just to spread that awareness for a lot of people because they live in that bubble and it's hard to pop through.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to thank you for extending the invitation and for being such a gracious friend and such a great resource just for everything. On that same token, I know that a lot of people might not want to invite me on their show for various reasons because I'm not super shy about my opinions or because they are we don't need to get into it, but it is what it is.
Right.
But in any case, I really appreciate it. I think what you're doing is basically invaluable, and I want to let you know that you're doing an amazing job, and I'm thankful to be a part of it.
Well, thank you. This, again, is going to be, by the time this is up, everybody will know that this is a series of 3 conversations with individuals that are either female identifying or non-binary and coming from a perspective that well, first of all, I struggled to find for this channel simply because a lot of the history behind the hobby and industry is so male focused. So I wanted to be able to shine a light on other perspectives, but show that the depth of knowledge that people have can really shine on these other segments of society that get, I hate to say such a word, but like undervalued by people without even the blink of an eye. So the 3 very different conversations are important, and I hope people give them the time of day and realize that we should be doing what we can to surround ourselves with a diverse crowd for that reason, because otherwise it might be where you are finding yourself struggling to empathize with those that are around you, and that's when it starts to get really dark for all of us.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's all we got. Thanks everybody for hanging out for the long conversation and through a lot of the darkness and the extremity and through the trauma, and just realize that there are other people like you. There is a source of solace that you can find. There is catharsis in film and art, and one of the biggest things is there's a lot of that catharsis and solace in a sense of community. So join us, comment down below, make sure that you're subscribed to both channels, and just find a way to make that community something that you can be a part of, because it can genuinely make a positive impact on your life.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And I'm really excited to see the other entries in this series because I know you got some real banger ass guests. So I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Thank you everybody for watching. We'll see you next time. Have a good one.